So I need to turn these 4 boards that you see behind me into this. So the purpose of this video is to show you exactly how I go about doing that. But more importantly, stick around to the end and I'll show you how I get perfectly flat panels at glue up every time. First thing I like to do is take my boards. These are all already milled down, and I'm gonna lay them up on the table, and I wanna see what orientation I want these boards. Just get the boards up onto the work surface. Once I have the boards in the orientation that I want, what I'll do is I'll first check the seams. This is my opportunity to make sure that my seams come together nice. If I push them together and they disappear, like it did there, then I know I'm good. I know I have good cuts on both. Same thing, the seam is right here, but as I push them together, they line up perfectly and there's no rock. This is a very important step in whether or not your panel is going to be flat. You need to have 90-degree edges, and if you don't, you need to have alternate edges. So if this is 89 this direction, the other one needs to be 89 the other direction. That's a whole nother video. All I'm looking for here, make sure that my seams come together nice and tight. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a few minutes and identify any problems that I need to cut out. This whole table is 8 feet long right now, or this whole top is 8 feet long. It only needs to be 7. Typically, you're gonna have a lot of defects at the ends of the boards. So what I like to do is keep them the full length or oversize them, mark those out, and then I know exactly where I need to cut, and I can also adjust the other boards as necessary. Here I've brought you into roughly the center of the table, and now I'm gonna show you things that I'm not really concerned about, and that is this lip right here. If you watch, I can push that down. So that means that this board is bowed like this after sitting for a little while. That's fine. That is why we're going to use an alignment aid, and in this case, I'm going to use a biscuit joiner, and when I use the biscuit joiner and I put it together, it'll bring it perfectly level with the other surface. So this kind of stuff I'm not super worried about. Whether you use a biscuit, a domino, a dowel, anything that will help ensure that the 2 boards come together on the same plane, they will all do the same thing in this application. I'm not adding anything for strength for this tabletop panel. Instead, I'm just making sure that the boards come together perfectly flush to allow me to get a nice flat tabletop, as well as save me a bunch of time on the sanding. This is another example of an area that I have a defect. On the underside, I had some piece breakaway while I was cutting it. I want to make sure that that gets cut out. So I don't have anything else really that is a problem on either this end or the other end. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to draw a line, and this is going to be my reference, let's just say right here. This is my reference line. I'll tell you why I'm marking it in just a moment. This is potentially where the end of my table will be after I make my final cut. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tape measure, and before I said I need a total of 7 feet out of this table. This part right here doesn't need to be perfect. This is all just a reference. Okay, so 7 feet is right down here. As long as I have 7 feet of total usable lumber, I'm good. And now what I'm doing is I'm checking that other defect, and I'm just gonna go 1 or 2 inches past that mark. It's still gonna be oversized. I'm gonna mark my line. This is the importance of this line right here. So I know that I have the usable space that I need. And again, I said I'm using biscuits. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna lay a couple of these out, and what I wanna make sure is that I'm not putting them within a few inches of where I plan on cutting this table. The reason for that is because if I put them here, and let's just say I cut right on this 74-inch line, it just happens to fall there, I'm gonna have an exposed biscuit. So for this first row, I'm just looking for a reasonably safe distance from my end, so I know that will not be a problem. It's always really crappy when you go to town on putting biscuits or dominoes and something, you cut the end off and you see that exposed domino or tendon. A couple extra minutes of layout will eliminate that for you completely. I'll make my mark, and then that is now my reference, and I'm gonna use my T-square here just to start laying out the locations. And they don't need to be perfect, just quick, simple markings. Now for me, I'm going to actually put one of these about every 6 inches or so. Why am I going every 6 inches? It's really just a personal preference, but what I can tell you is I'm a little bit more free with biscuits than I am dominoes, right? Because it's a cost thing. Biscuits are far less expensive. And the other reason is, if I do have significant bowing, the more that you have and the closer they are together, the better of a job it's going to do in ensuring that everything is aligned. And I'm not saying that you need to put one every 2 inches, because that would be absolute overkill. But just think it through. For me, every 6 to 8 inches, put one of these and we're good to go. Now this next part is pretty self-explanatory. Use my biscuit joiner and cut out all the slots for all the biscuits, and then we'll get to the next step. Before I set these off to the side so I can go and get my assembly table all ready for glue up, one other thing that I want to do is make sure that I mark the order in which the boards are. Starting from left to right, I'll either use a number scheme or a letter scheme. In this case, I'll just use letters. So this is A, B, C, D. I didn't want to bore everybody with the process that I go through for a glue up, but just a couple helpful tips, right? Take a couple extra minutes to lay out some of this craft butcher paper. Just tape it down to the surface. And then the other thing that I would highly encourage is use some tape or wax or supping your clamps. I prefer parallel clamps for just about all applications. But this will just stop the glue from getting on it and then making it not work over time. Ask me how I know that. So when I'm setting up these clamps, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in under and over configuration. And this is not something that I've always done. However, the trick that I'm going to show you actually makes it make a lot more sense, because you're going to be able to see what I'm talking about. Now, this is a 7-foot long tabletop. Again, my whole setup is right around 8 feet. So I'm only going to use 7 clamps for this application. I'm going to do 4 on the bottom and I'm going to do 3 on the top. So what I'm doing now is just getting my bottom clamps in place, just kind of evenly spaced. And now I can go ahead and get my boards up here. I have a total of 4 boards, so I'm going to do this on 2 separate sides. I'm going to do 2 over here, and I'm going to do 2 over on this side. Now the way that I'm placing these boards is going to be the first 2 edges going together. So this is going to go into this. I'm going to glue both surfaces. I then like to add a liberal amount of glue to all of my pieces, spread it all out, go through and put in the biscuits, and move to the next step. Once I have the 2 pieces glued and the biscuits are in, then I can go ahead and take the board, flip it up on both sides, and get these 2 pieces joined together. And this is where it might take just a little maneuvering based on how far off your board was to begin with. Now those are pretty good. I could do the other side. And lastly, I'll do the exact same thing to my 2 bigger halves, and then we'll get everything put together. One thing I would like to highlight is I find if you put the glue in like an S pattern all the way down, it's far easier to spread evenly and it's much faster. Now the stressful part is done, which is the main part of the glue up. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this down. You'll notice I don't have any closed gaps yet. Doesn't matter, right? I've worked quick enough to where the glue has not set yet. Obviously, you want to be fast in a situation like this, especially depending on the type of glue that you're using. I have a tendency to use pretty much Type Bond 3 all the time. So now what I want to do is I want to get the biscuits aligned just like that. I'm aligned on this end. Now I'm just going to work my way down. This is where everything is going to make sense. You've always heard, don't over tighten your clamps. Don't over tighten your clamps. In this video, I'm going to show you what happens visually when you over tighten your clamps. Now, I just said don't over tighten your clamps a whole bunch. Right now, what you're going to see me do is over tighten the clamps. Because right now, what I want to do is I want to get these boards together. And I'm not going to go all the way tight. I'm just watching to see that they go together. I have a gap down here, and I want to see these seams close, and they're getting there, okay? Go to the middle. The pressure on my clamps right now at this point does not matter. I am trying to get all of those boards together. I want to see that squeeze out, so I'm tightening hard. And as you can see, I've got squeeze out, nice even squeeze out pretty much everywhere. There's a couple of places that it could be better. Still got a ways to go here. I'm gonna tighten this down, and now it's starting to get some squeeze out right here. Tighten that down. Okay, it's getting there. This is the last one here. Go ahead and get this together. And see, you can see the squeeze out just coming out real easy there. So by the time you get to the last one, it should be pretty good. Okay, I see squeeze out all across here. I've still got a little bit of a gap right there. And as I kind of push the boards together, I can see some of that glue coming out. But that means I need some clamping pressure in the middle. So what I'm gonna do now, since I've already gotten these all the way together, I'm gonna loosen these. There's still pressure, they're just not crazy tight. So now I'm gonna put the clamps on the opposite direction, the 3 across the top. I still have a spot right here that's kind of fighting me a little bit. And guess what? It's directly in between those 2 clamps. Well, I want these about every 12 inches or so. So now I have that clamp in place. Go ahead and start tightening this down, and that will pull that last section together. And I'm looking for the squeeze out, and now I see it. So I can go ahead and back off the pressure on that clamp a little bit. Do the same thing to the middle and then to the other end. Before I get to the secret to having perfectly flat glue ups, the simple secret, I'm gonna go ahead and clean up all of this glue because I don't want it to get on the thing that I'm about to show you. And what I like to do is just use this old spare card scraper that I have for a couple of reasons. One, it'll show you where your high spots are. And what I mean by that is if you look right here, you can see there's a very thin film of glue, and it's because right here it's just ever so slightly proud. But if you look right here, it's perfectly flush because it scraped the glue off perfectly. So here is the genius trick to ensure you have perfectly flat glue ups and that you have the proper amount of pressure in the clamps. Cannot stress that enough. This is where people fail. They sit here and they wrench it down as tight as it will go because they think that they need that force. What you need is for the 2 glue surfaces to meet together and have a slight bit of pressure, and that's it. So what I've done is I've tightened it way down. If you look at that, you can see it is not flat. Now, as I start to loosen this, still have a little bit of a rock. I have now eliminated the rock in this straight edge. I now have a flat surface and I have the proper amount of pressure on this particular clamp. I know that this is straight. And all I'm gonna do from this point is go clamp by clamp and make sure, see this right here? Slight rock. I can just sight down the side of it. Now I have no more rock. I have a perfectly flat surface. Let me bring you in close to give you a perfect representation. Now that you're in close, you'll be able to see that there is a bow in this board, meaning the center is high, because I can close that gap by rocking this straight edge. So you'll watch, as I start to loosen this clamp is way over tightened. As I start to loosen this, it's going to close that gap, and now I no longer have any rock in this panel. None. I am flat all the way across. I still have pressure on the clamps, on the boards, and it is plenty to hold it until the glue dries. Though there's a lot of great uses for a straight edge, and this is one of them. Why? Because it's going to visually show you which clamps need to be adjusted. Over-tightening clamps is a problem that so many people have, me included. So using this straight edge, and this isn't even an expensive straight edge, it's like 50 bucks, it's made of aluminum, and it's about 38 inches long. I think it's 968 millimeters, but it's a UJK straight edge. It works great. I use it for all kinds of things. But now I use it to visually see how flat the panels are that I'm gluing up. I can lay it on top of the surface and I can watch as I close that gap or create that gap or whatever the case is by simply laying this on and checking each clamp as I go down the board. Hopefully you guys found that helpful. I'll leave links to some of the things that I talked about in the video description below. Other than that, thanks for watching.